This program's only been on the air for a few months now, but we've done quite a few segments on ESG. ESG. We're not the only ones. I know you're hearing it all over the place on media, on Capitol Hill. ESG, environmental, social, and governance standards. Why is it important? And why are our elected officials starting to call on CEOs of corporations to step down because of their implementation of these environmental, social, governance standards? Well, joining us right now to shed some light is Will Held, Executive Director of Consumers Research. Will, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is a big deal. And listen, I get nervous when I see elected officials at the state level or at the federal level starting to call CEOs in and putting them under the gun and saying you should step down, sir. But there is actually a basis for this kind of thing right now because of this company called BlackRock and their implementation of these ESG standards across our country. Real fast, give us a thumbnail of what ESG is and what BlackRock is doing.
Certainly. Well, ESG stands for Environmental Social Governance, and it's billed by its supporters, like BlackRock and its CEO, Larry Fink, as simply another style of investing, much like momentum investing or value investing that Warren Buffett is famous for. But what it really is a stalking horse that allows people like Larry Fink and its company BlackRock to inject partisan politics, far left politics, into the corporate boardroom. He takes the assets that they have under management, a lot of which is federal and local and state pension funds, and he uses those assets to basically lobby or force corporate America to dance to his tune, specifically on things like net zero, on far left social policy. And so, really, what this is a stalking horse for progressive politics.
Let's give a real world example. When the voter integrity laws were passed in the state of Georgia, we saw a big outcry from Democrats that this was racist. This is Jim Crow 2.0, typical stuff. We're used to it, right? I mean, it's racist to suggest that somebody of color can't get a photo ID, but for some reason, making someone get a photo ID is racist. Fine, leave it alone for a minute. What was astounding, Wilheld, was when Delta Airlines and United Airlines and Coca Cola and Major League Baseball and all of these other corporations suddenly started to make statements, started to divest from the state of Georgia as a punishment, as a retaliation. Is that it's like people sitting around, why does Coke care about this? Well, they don't, except that major investors are pressuring them to get involved. Is that what we're seeing?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's a big part of why you've seen such a left wing rush by corporate America on a number of different issues, election integrity being one of them. We ran ads against many of the companies that did that, pointing out that they were simply trying to distract from many of their failings in the market and their mistreatment of their customers. Ironically, American Airlines was one of the companies that came out strongest, a company that you can't use their product without showing photo ID, I'd note.
Right.
But you're right. You're seeing more and more companies have to dance to this ESG tune because if not, they will get punished in their ratings, and that will hurt the amount of shares that are allocated at these big funds. Or even worse, BlackRock sometimes will keep the shares of these companies and vote against your board of directors or try to replace you, as we saw them try to do with Exxon last year.
So, for instance, when it's Pride Month, and it's almost become a punchline now on Pride Month, everybody, all these corporations all come up with a rainbow flag version of their logo. And I think most of us just think and say, well, they decided that's good for their brand, it's good for their business, it's good for sales. So, fine, who cares? But what you're telling me is this really doesn't have to do with the public necessarily or for good sales and actually engendering goodwill with we consumers. It's really just about satisfying a very small group of people who are forcing them to do this.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And one of the advantages that ESG has for people like Larry Fink who want to push progressive politics is that there's three letters. So take a company that maybe doesn't do so great on the E. Well, you could say, listen, if you would take a stance on abortion or LGBTQ issues, as you noted, we noticed your logo didn't change to a rainbow flag last year. Well, maybe we can, even that score out a little bit for you. And otherwise,
Uh,
if they're pushing, the E stuff hard, they can balance this stuff out. So, for example, a company that makes EV, electronic vehicles, there are all kinds of environmental issues that go into those lithium cobalt batteries. I mean, most of the cobalt in the world is mined by young child slaves in the Congo in open pit mines that are both obviously socially horrible and environmentally horrible. But they give a pass on that because these companies are supposedly moving us towards these so-called net zero targets, meaning net zero carbon emissions. There's
Wow.
some question as to whether they're even doing that on the whole. But my point being that ESG in many ways is a way to cover up bad things that companies are doing or involved because they can hide behind these ESG scores. And so you see a lot of them play ball with the logos during June moving to a rainbow flag because that helps them in ways that then covers for other bad things that they're doing either in the
Right.
market or to their customers.
Now, this brings us to where state governments are getting involved, elected officials. I know West Virginia, we've spoken with the treasurer of West Virginia and also some state senators in Texas. They're now trying to put pressure on BlackRock and Larry Fink. By the way, if you went to Hollywood and wrote a script with an evil CEO of an evil, maniacal global corporation, they would laugh you out of the room with a name like Larry Fink and BlackRock. I mean, it sounds like something from one of the Austin Powers movies. What happened here, and what are state governments doing about them, and why is this a big deal?
Well, basically, what happened is you had a few states like California, New York, New Jersey, Illinois, who basically said, if you want to do business with us, if you want to manage our pension funds, well, then you have to commit to use your entire portfolio to push our objectives. And for a long time, unfortunately,
Wow.
conservative states were not pushing back on that. They were allowing their state pension funds, who were managed by companies like BlackRock, to be used to push the agendas of states like California and Illinois and New York. And increasingly, Republican states are waking up to the fact that their own money is being used against them. Their own pension funds are being used to attack the industries key to their state. So just last week in Texas, there was a hearing of this Texas Senate State Affairs Committee that oversees their retirement system. And they called in BlackRock and State Street and their proxy advising service, ISS, who had misvoted their assets against fossil fuel projects, against financing new fossil fuel projects with Texas state assets. So it's really getting to the point where, I mean, they are taking assets that belong to a state and using them to attack the very industries that state relies on to fund the pension funds. It's really absurd.
What do you say to people, Will, who argue and say, listen, this is just capitalism. These guys have the money, they have the power, they have the influence. And if they want to move their own personal agenda, companies don't have to go along. The pension funds don't have to go along. They can just, find investors somewhere else.
Well, that's certainly the argument that they're trying to make on their side. What's ironic about that is that circular reasoning, because they're making that argument in rebuttal to states doing that very thing, is saying, listen, you're not going to take our money anymore. You're undermining our interests. You're supposed to work for us. We're going to take that money back and give it to somebody who's not going to use it against us. And so it's funny that when they try to call them out on their breach of their fiduciary, on the conflict of interest that they have, that their first thing is, well, this is just the market. This is just the market. But yet they don't think that the
Right.
states ought to be able to act like market participants and defend their own interests. So it's really it's an absurd defense. It's circular. And states aren't going to buy it because it is a market, and so these
Yeah.
states are going to move back. I will say though, as well, it's they are breaching their fiduciary duty when they do this. So it's not just that, hey, if you don't like what's going on in the market, move your money somewhere else. There is a legal standard that these companies are supposed to be meeting, and they are falling down on that standard.
Well, that's a very important legal standard, especially when it comes to a pension fund investment as well. In our final minute here, Mr. Hill, what's going on in terms of these calls for Larry Fink to actually step down? Has he done something? I mean, I disagree with what he's done, but is it improper? Is it in some way illegal? Why are they calling for his resignation?
Well, no, not at all. For example, the North Carolina treasurer that led the way in asking for his resignation, North Carolina is a customer of BlackRock's. This is like just like any other private citizen who's a market participant saying they're sick of a company mistreating them and they think that there ought to be new management. In fact, Larry Fink pushes new management at companies all the time. Last year, he voted 3 radical environmentalists onto the board of Exxon because he didn't like the way that company was run. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander. North Carolina is a client of BlackRock's, and absolutely the treasurer is the highest elected fiduciary in that state, has a right to call for Larry Fink's dismissal, and I think he's right to do so.
Seriously though, does Larry Fink? He's got his main office in a lair at the base of a volcano or something. It sounds like an evil villain or something. Larry
He
Fink from
definitely has Lex
BlackRock.
Luthor vibes going on. There's no doubt about it.
Thanks for joining us, Will Held. We're out of time now. More to come on O'Connor tonight.